If you drafted two or more of these players, there's a good chance you've already spent 24 hours in a Waffle House serving your last place punishment. I'm Matt Duraldi, doing a solo episode today. This is the Fantasy Football Forecast, and let's jump into some of the biggest busts of the 2024 season. Right off the top, we've got Anthony Richardson. With Richardson, all signs were pointing up, right? We got Shane Steichen, up-tempo offense, playing in a dome against divisional teams twice a year that put up points, don't necessarily have the best defenses. And looking back to 2023, he put up 21.9 and 29.6 fantasy points in his two full starts. In his other start, he scored 17 fantasy points in just over one quarter of play before getting hurt. He was number one in fantasy points per snap at the position, almost 20% more than the second best player, Josh Allen. They added Adonai Mitchell in this offseason, who many viewed as the number 5 wide receiver in this loaded class. All of this led to an ADP of QB6, in some cases QB5. He ended up finishing as QB23. He missed 6 games, weeks 5, 6, 17, and 18 due to injury, weeks 8 and 9 getting benched for Joe Flacco. And he ended up with a 47% completion percentage and a touchdown to interception ratio of 8-12. That is just atrocious. He's another great example of not getting too carried away with a small sample size in fantasy. Like, he just hasn't made that many starts. Like, even looking back to the collegiate level, like, he only started 13 games. And obviously he's got all the talent in the world. Obviously, the Colts are not going to give up on Anthony Richardson. Like, hopefully he can make strides as a passer this offseason. We know his ability as a rusher, and he has so much upside that I think his ADP still will reflect that this year, but it'll be interesting to see. And he's one of those guys where it's very different of how you evaluate him when you play in a superflex league versus a standard redraft league, right? In standard, you drafted him, didn't work out, you cut him. Someone like Tua's on the wire, Stafford's on the wire, Geno's on the wire. Like, it's not that big of a deal. But in superflex, if you drafted this guy as the QB5 and he's your first quarterback taken, like, that can really crater your season. So we'll see what happens next year. Like, I wish him all the best. He's an extremely fun player to watch, but like, some of those easy missed throws, like, are just inexcusable at the NFL level. Moving on to the next guy who was a massive bust, again, for Superflex, and I hate talking about this guy, Deshaun Watson. He came into the year with an ADP of QB22. Obviously, his shoulder injury knocked him out the year prior, and going into camp, we were getting reports that he was progressing well. Then in August, we were getting reports of like arm soreness, which should have been a red flag. And I think people wanted so badly for him to get back to where he was with the Texans. Like, maybe not like the peak that he was at as a passer, but like at least as a rusher. But this year, like, not only was he bad, he was like a complete disgrace. And through 6 weeks, he was producing just 3.6 passing yards per dropback. And apparently that ranks 814 out of 815 qualified players at quarterback. I just Googled like Deshaun Watson awful stats, and that really stuck out to me. In his 7 games where he was a starter, he threw 5 touchdowns in 7 games. I don't know. It's just, I can't even fathom this. He had 3 interceptions and he took 33 sacks. So I'm done talking about Deshaun Watson, just a complete and utter disaster of a year. Who knows what's going to happen next year? It sounds like he's already struggling with his Achilles recovery. The Browns are in a very difficult position with his contract. So who knows? But moving over to the running back position, we've got Travis Etienne. So I don't even know at this point if he's the most famous Etienne. His brother was kind of doing his thing there at Georgia for a little bit. He came into the year as the ADP of RB7, and he ended up finishing as the RB36. And he was coming off a season where he was RB3 in half PPR off of monster volume. I mean, he was averaging like 20 touches per game. And the coaching staff was telling us all off season how much more involved Tank Bigsby would be. But we didn't want to listen because Coach Speak Index was telling us how unreliable Doug Peterson is. And lo and behold, Etienne's highest volume week was week 15 against the Jets, where he got 18 touches. And that was good for 85 yards and no scores. And Bigsby was kind of looking like a league winner there for a hot second. I know people were starting to get a little bit carried away with him. Obviously, he came back down to earth, and really neither running back was startable for the latter half of the season. So again, just a tough blow if you drafted Travis Etienne, especially if you drafted him over like Etienne, who was going right next to him. But anyways, moving on to the next guy, we've got Javonte Williams, who came into the year with an ADP of RB27. And I couldn't understand going into the season all this talk around like which Broncos running back should you draft? And, we talked about this at length at our Denver Broncos team preview where it was like, why not just take none of them? And, maybe we were a little bit higher on Audric Estime than others were. And, certainly didn't think that the Broncos were going to be a playoff team with Bo Nix in his first year. But Sean Payton was talking about how this was going to be a running back carousel with these two, Jaleel McLaughlin. And like, we know Payton loves his guys, and Javonte was the only one who wasn't one of Payton's guys. And so I think the takeaway is like, if you're told that it's going to be a committee approach or worse, like a three-headed monster approach, like just don't try to guess correctly. Like just go in a different direction with that draft pick. And if it turns out like one of those guys ends up being the number one, maybe they're available on the wire. Like you guys all remember Audric Estime was like the hot wire commodity. Everyone was like, blow all the rest of your fab. He's going to be great. Peyton's been telling us he's going to be taking over. Didn't really work in Estime's case, but, just kind of take that as a lesson, going forward. Moving over to the wide receiver position, we've got Jaylen Waddle. He was ADP of wide receiver 20. He finished the year as wide receiver 49. And man, we were so out on Waddle. Trevor and I probably did 100 mock drafts together in the offseason, and I don't recall ever taking him. I had him 0 best ball teams because he was going in the second round. And like, I think the world of Jaylen Waddle. I think he's an excellent player. I mean, Devontae Smith was the first wide receiver to win a Heisman in almost 30 years. And he got picked after Jaylen Waddle, who was his own teammate. I know that seems like a little bit trivial, but just think about that. It's been almost 30 years since a wide receiver wins the Heisman. And then that guy is the second wide receiver on his own team taken in the draft. Like, obviously, Waddle is extremely talented. But coming off a season where he was wide receiver 34, like, yes, he missed 2 games in that season, but it's not like he was the only guy that missed time in the league. And this year, I mean, we can remove the games where Tua missed because all the skill positions were awful when he was out. But Waddle was still the number 4 target earner on his team. And like, as awesome as Waddle was in his first 2 seasons, like that was on volume. Like he's never been a double-digit touchdown guy. And, we don't know what's going to happen with Miami and Tyreek Hill's future. I don't think Tyreek is necessarily being fair to the situation. Like they almost made the playoffs and Tua missed 5 games. But in my opinion, I think that the Dolphins should draft Dylan Gabriel, quarterback for Oregon. He's like a 6-year guy, obviously was a Heisman finalist. I think if they can get him in the 3rd or 4th round, I think that would be a very wise pick because their games are very similar. I know it's like the lefty thing, the Hawaiian thing, but just getting the ball out quickly, being able to run that up-tempo offense, I think would be a great fit because I'm not saying he's going to take over for Tua. I'm saying that if Tua misses time, gets injured, like there's a guy that more or less you can plug and play into the system that I think would be a good fit. I mean, we saw how awful Miami was when Tua missed time. Like, I think that makes a lot of sense. I haven't seen or read that anywhere. This is just kind of I don't know, what I think they should do. And I think he probably will be available in the 3rd or 4th round. I don't think people have too high of a grade on him, especially being a little bit of a smaller guy. But we'll see what happens. Moving on to the next guy, we've got Deebo Samuel. So Deebo had an ADP of wide receiver 10. He ended up as the wide receiver 44. And this one's tough. Like he finished as the wide receiver 9 in points per game the year prior. And he's just someone who has always passed the eye test, is a great player. And when you draft Deebo, there's going to be some down weeks because there's so many mouths to feed on this offense. But you're drafting him for the weeks where he just explodes and you win that week. And I don't know if this was like a bad omen, but the first week of the year, my buddy who's a huge Niners fan texted me. He was like, Deebo looks smaller this year. I don't really like the number change. Like I'm just not getting a good vibe from this. And I know he was going back to the number he wore at South Carolina, but from the jump, it just didn't really seem right. And I think going into this upcoming season, he's going to be a tough guy to rank. And I would imagine will be pretty polarizing. Like I'll be in on Deebo if I can get him at a heavy discount and be patient, but I'm not really comfortable having him as a starter at this point. So we'll see what happens with that. But moving over to the tight end position, we got Dalton Kincaid. So he was an ADP of tight end 5. He finished as tight end 29. He missed a few games, but he still only averaged 6.1 half PPR points per game, which was 20th at the position. And Kincaid is like another great example of not getting too carried away with projecting a player. He finished as tight end 12 the year prior. He had that good stretch in the middle of the year when Dawson Knox was out, but our biggest warning about Kincaid, and we made a short about this, was that when Dawson Knox the year prior returned from injury from week 14 through the divisional round, Kincaid only averaged a 57% snap share. And like, I love Dalton Kincaid. I loved watching him at Utah. Like, I'm a big Pac-12 guy, RIP, but he just really hasn't shown the same like athleticism and yak ability that made him a first round pick in the draft. And like, I thought I was a homer, like acknowledging his room for improvement and a chance to take a step forward. Like, and I still do, but I ruffled some feathers by just like not blindly assuming he was going to have this breakout year. Like, I got some comments about how he was going to be the clear cut number 1. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. He was going in the 5th round of best ball tournaments. Like, that is just insane. So I really hope, he continues to make strides and improves. He's obviously attached to a great quarterback, so wish him nothing but the best. But in fantasy, like, going to have my guard up a little bit. The next guy, the last guy, Kyle Pitts. I mean, every year people make an excuse to push Kyle Pitts up the board. After going for 1,000 yards his rookie year and only scoring 1 touchdown, it was, just imagine what will happen when he scores 5+ touchdowns next year. The year after that, it was like, oh, he only played 10 games, but he's a generational talent, so we cannot fade this guy. The year after that, it was, well, Arthur Smith hates him and he's gone, and now we have Kirk Cousins, so like we're going to push him up. And this upcoming season, like, just you wait, we're going to hear Penix is the real deal and their chemistry is off the charts, so I'm not going to give up on Kyle Pitts. Like, I'm not in on him. And the main reason he was on our do not draft list this year was we admitted that the situation was better going into the season, or at least presumably so, but we just wanted to see it first. And, that obviously didn't happen. And he got pushed up to tight end 7 in ADP, finished as tight end 15, was cut in most leagues. Obviously, a lot of people kind of held on to him that weren't like super savvy managers. He had a couple spike weeks, kind of just holding on to that hope for interruption week. But man, just another tough season. So hopefully you guys didn't draft too many of these guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Look forward to doing more kind of recap videos from the 2024 season. We're doing a lot of 2025 content already. We've done a couple mock drafts. So if you're interested, if you're a complete sicko and you're already mocking in January, go ahead and check those out. But thank you guys so much for watching. Look forward to seeing you in the next one.